Hey everyone, thanks for watching another video. This video went from being a super short and simple video to an even shorter and simpler video. That's because I forgot to turn on the receiver for the mic I was using and didn't record any of the audio. But that's okay because this is honestly one of the most simple things you can do in a van build, and there's not much to it. So we're installing this floor trim that we got from a company called AVC Rig. So we're going to put trim on the back step, on the very back doors, on the side step for the sliding door, and there's also some trim that goes behind the two front seats. So like I said, this is going to be a super simple video. We're not going to go into like a how-to for any of this stuff because in fact AVC Rig, the company that we got the trim from, has their own YouTube channel with tons of informational stuff on their products. So if you want to know exactly how to install it, go check that YouTube channel out. This is going to be more just a first impression review from a DIYer perspective, and just kind of some first impressions and initial thoughts on the product. So one thing I wanted to mention right off the bat is just the fact that they don't provide any screws for the trim. There are holes for screws in the trim, but there's no screws that they provide, so we had to go get our own. We went with these black screws that match the trim. They're kind of rounded on the edges, so nothing's going to catch as it rolls over. In their own YouTube video on how to install this trim, they recommend using some kind of adhesive or even silicone on the side step, on the place that you step on. But I went ahead and just installed or laid down a thin strip of the silicone that we used on all the strips of trim, just because. But it's probably not something you need to do. So here I am just laying down a thin strip, and this goes without saying, but you should test fit the trim for the floor you have installed just to make sure it fits right. I went ahead and drilled pilot holes in each of the holes where the screws go. We used Baltic birch in our floor, and I just wanted to avoid any potential issues that could come from screwing into that hardwood. This is just a precautionary measure though. Then there's nothing left to do but screw it down. It's a pretty simple install. Another thing I'll point out, I know it's a little bit bad lighting, but you can see that the screws stick up a little bit, and that's because the trim does not come with the screw holes countersunk. And so if they were, you'd be able to use the beveled screw head and get it pretty flush with the top of that trim. That's something you could potentially do yourself, but I just wanted to point that out. I think it looks good with what we chose, but that could be something you might want to do, and it could look good either way. Okay, moving on to the side step, and you can see that we actually had to take out the floor we had installed there. We treated that area the same as we treated the rest of the floor just to match it, but the side step for this trim kit actually needs to sit right on the metal. Otherwise, it'll stick up past the main floor in the van, and it won't allow you to sit the actual trim over it, if that makes sense. So here I'm just test fitting it and getting it into the position I want it, because something you'll see later in just a minute is where there is a miter joint in the corner right behind the passenger seat. And that's exactly what I was talking about. And so this step needs to be lined up in the correct position for that miter joint to line up. Otherwise there'll be a big seam and it will look unfinished and just not very nice. And here I am just putting down a few dots of the silicone that we're using. And here I'm finally putting in the side step. I used a pencil to mark the metal in a spot that would line up with the trim so that it's in the correct position for that miter joint. And it actually stopped recording. I ran out of memory before I put in the actual trim on that area. You can kind of see it in the side of the screen there. It's installed and screwed in. And in this part I'm just laying down a thin strip of that silicone before screwing in the front trim piece. And here I am drilling the pilot holes and the screw holes before screwing it all down. I took a few before and after videos of the places where we installed the trim. There's the side step, and then behind the passenger seat and the very back door. This is what it looks like after it's installed. You can see the miter joint looks nice and tight, nice and finished. I really like how that turned out. Here's the side step as well, nice and done, and the very back step. Some of you are going to be wondering what this hole is for, and it's actually because we're going to have the countertop extend into the sliding door a little bit, and we just didn't know how far it was going to go when we were putting our floor in, so we just left that area blank. But it doesn't really matter because it's going to be covered with framing and cabinets and everything. Another thing I want to point out is that it came with some grip tape for the side step, a couple pieces of that, which if you're using it as a work vehicle, I think that's fine, but otherwise it's just going to get super dirty. So we're not going to be using that, but I just thought I'd mention they do include that in this kit. We are actually just going to be using another piece of this material that we used for the rest of the floor to cover that step. So thanks for watching. We honestly really love how this trim turned out, and we'd recommend it to anyone else who's looking. The only downside I'd say is just what I mentioned earlier, is the fact that it doesn't come with any screws, and I'd also say it's kind of on the more expensive side. But besides that, we very much love it.